Our guest today is CBS correspondent Daniel Schorr, one of the most experienced of all journalists and well known for his coverage of Watergate. I think it's inevitable, Mr. Schorr, that we ask you. You seem to be so unflappable. You were on the enemy's list, which is now a mark of distinction during the Nixon administration. They were trying to get something on you, and yet you were covering the story. Was that not a kind of funny dual role you had to play?
My role was covering the story. Being drawn into the story that I was covering was something that they had done. It complicated my life a little bit, but if there's anything to being a professional in this business, it is trying to keep out those things which complicate your life. It's a little bit like somebody off stage waving at you when you're on camera. You just try to forget it's happening. I think probably the most difficult professional problem I've ever faced in my career, and that goes back in CBS alone for 22 years, before which I had a newspaper career, and the most difficult problem I've ever had was rushing out of a hearing room in the Senate caucus room with the first copy of the enemy's list in my hand, which I hadn't a chance to go through, getting on live camera and reading down the list of the top 20 and coming across my name.
The first time you ever saw it?
The first time I ever saw it.
And showing no reaction?
Trying to show no reaction.
Well, you were remarkably unflappable through the whole thing. You would come on late at night or whenever a story was breaking, and in many cases you broke the story. Absolutely calm, and even though you had a man of many years' experience, I would think that it would have been somewhat of an interior trial for you.
Of course, any big story, and a story that developed as this one did, and a story in which you find yourself suddenly, involuntarily a part of the story, presents inside problems. You're absolutely right, but it seems to me the whole name of the game is keeping inside problems inside while you're working.
On the other hand, Daniel Schorr came out with a clean bill of health. You're apparently not a lush. You apparently don't fool around with women.
How do you know all that?
A gambler.
Have you seen my file?
I think you were probably dealing with the kind of people who, had you had any defects like that, Dan, would have been quick to make it public.
Yes. Now,
I jest, but
before you give me this clean bill of health, which I ideally like to have, right, let me tell you that the whole investigation lasted only for 7 hours. There was a goof. Something went wrong. What Haldeman had asked on behalf of President Nixon was for an FBI file on me. And J. Edgar Hoover either got his signals crossed or decided for impish reasons of his own to cross the signals and open up a full field investigation of me, which meant that people were openly interviewed by the FBI, including myself. When the White House heard what was happening and realized that they were giving me a card to play by letting me know the investigation was on, they panicked and they called off the investigation in 7 hours. Well, even if I was a lush and did a lot of other things which I might be ashamed of, the FBI can't find out anything in 7 hours. It just needs more time. The investigation started with a cable to the American embassy in Germany, asking them to start the investigation there, that on the strength of an outdated Who's Who reference to me, which had me listed as CBS correspondent in Germany, which I had been until 5 years before. And I'd been on the air for 5 years from Washington, but the FBI started the investigation in Germany. I guess if there's anything that's going to protect the civil rights of Americans when there are unwarranted investigations in progress, it is that they tend to be not terribly efficiently done.
Did you at any time believe the story that the investigation was done because the administration really wanted to offer you a job?
I entertained that possibility for a while, mainly because it seemed to me so utterly absurd for them to have started a wide-open investigation of me as a way of intimidating me. And so I thought, Bill Small never did. He was my boss in Washington. He, from the very word go, said, there's something very strange about this. Well, suppose, they want to offer me a job, and somebody started the investigation before somebody else got around to offering the job. He said, maybe, but I don't think so.
Right. Bill Small, of course, our former news director. And
your former news director and my present news director.
Right. Director of news for CBS. All right. You're a human being, and you're very professional and cool, but you are human. Now, when those people who tried to do you in went to jail, what kind of reaction did you have?
None. None on the air. None professionally. I had never had a reaction to them when I was covering them. I mean, I was had to stake out the Haldermans and the Ehrlichmans. They had reactions to me. They felt I was pursuing them. They felt that I was a nemesis of a kind. But no, I didn't have any reaction. Why should I? I mean, he was Haldeman, even though I went up to him in a restaurant once and when he was on trial and said, Bob, can we talk now about the FBI investigation of me? What's very hard to get across is that when a doctor performs an operation on a patient, nobody would ever ask him, did you like that patient or not? He just does the best operation he can. When he goes home, he tells his wife, I liked or I didn't like Mrs. So-on and so forth on whom I operated today, but it's not relevant. It is not relevant what I think individually of these persons or of former President Nixon. It's not part of my job.
But you have private thoughts.
And they remain private.
When Roger Mudd was a guest on this program, we asked him about being an anchorman. And he put it very bluntly. He said, and I quote him, "It stinks." Do you like being out in the field? Would you like to be behind a desk and the cameras on you as an anchorman?
It may sound like sour grapes. The chances of my being an anchorman, looking as I do and with my graying hair and the general image of being somewhat decrepit, the chances of my ever getting to be an anchorman are fairly minimal. But let me say that I've always enjoyed direct contact with the news. I have never in my life read a script, never read a script that anybody else wrote for me. Every word I've ever said on the air was either ad-libbed or written by myself. I don't read very well what others write for me. So I guess I don't have what it takes to be a good anchorman, and I guess I just will never be one.
Anchormen seem to be restive in their job. They like the glory, it seems, and they like the money, and yet a real newsman, it would seem to me, have reflected the desire to be out covering stories in the street, as it were. Now, people...
You can overcome that desire if the price is right.
Yes, and it generally is on the network level, I take it. People have become very conscious and very knowledgeable and sophisticated about news, aren't they? They know about anchor people, and they know when a woman is a correspondent.
I don't agree. I don't think people have become sophisticated at all. I mean, they get to know the people they see on the air, but I don't think they're sophisticated. I'm constantly amazed at how many people think that everything that is on the Cronkite show on any given evening was personally covered by Walter Cronkite himself, because they see something keyed in the background or there's some film. The average person thinks that everything that Walter Cronkite talks about, he is personally, the idea he's been all over the world that day and everything. People just don't think very deeply. I mean, Walter is connected with all the news, and he is connected with a lot of it, and he is sort of our flagship. But I don't think people are sophisticated about the news.
When you do a story, do you have a pretty good idea of its final shape on the network news, or do other hands then shape it for you?
No, I don't have a good idea when I cover the story. I will have a pretty good idea by the time it gets on the air. A lot of hands take part in shaping it. From the hand that says that you're not going to get 5 minutes for it, but only 2 minutes or 1 minute. That hand is a very important hand, the one that squeezes down. And then you work with the producer, and the one who says the best cut of film is this, and I say, no, it's that, and then we may compromise. It's a very joint effort.
Do you have a lot of input yourself?
It doesn't go on the air if I'm not satisfied with it, let me say that. But it also doesn't go on the air if I don't satisfy several other people.
Dan Schorr, if you had to do it all over again, would you follow this vocational path?
I've never wanted to be anything else but a newsman. Whether this medium is the best way to tell news, I'm still not sure. After 22 years, I'm still experimenting.
Well, you bring much grace and great professionalism to both CBS and Channel 11 News, and we thank you very much.
Thank you.
Daniel Schorr, our guest on Omelet.